Okay, good morning. Welcome to the 2026 Symposium on Religion, Culture, and Diversity. My name is Brian Birch. I direct the Religious Studies Center here at UVU and would like to publicly thank everyone who has been involved in the organization of this event. We have friends participating from the Department of Communication, from the Center for the Study of Ethics, and from the Department of Philosophy and Humanities, and I want to thank them all for their support. Our theme this year is entitled Public Voices, Religion, Media, and the Future of Civic Dialogue. And the aim of the symposium is to explore questions, as the title suggests, where religion and media meet and how this plays itself out in public discourse and other forms of public life. For the past few years, we've been leaning into issues of civic dialogue, civil society, and democratic culture, and we thought this was a very apt event for this year. So sessions will run between 9 a.m. and 1 p.m. here in this room. If anyone would like a schedule of the events, there is a QR code on the poster on the side of the room or outside the door if you want to see what's coming up between now and 1 o'clock. And for students who are here for a class, we have sign-up sheets on the sides of the room with a QR code where you can enter your name and instructor information so that you can get credit for being here. Our first session is going to be given by Dr. Joel Campbell. Uh, Joel is a longtime associate teaching professor of communication at BYU. For the past year, is that correct? For the past year, he has been a visiting associate professor of communication at BYU Hawaii, which is a wonderful way to wrap up your career. I'm sure you've had a great time, Joel. Prior to his work in academia, he worked as a reporter and editor for newspapers in Salt Lake City. He teaches media writing, journalism principles, media and religion, media and ethics, along with research courses. Um, he has presented or published papers on media coverage of Mitt Romney's Mormonism, the Among the Mormons show, uh, the Mormon newspaper in New York City, which I just learned about last night. Wonderful thing. And other things related to the Latter-day Saint tradition. So please join me in welcoming Dr. Joel Campbell.
Just for the record, I do want to correct that I only have a master's degree, but from Ohio State. But I was hired as a professional at BYU with both a master's and professional experience, which I guess at the time they counted as that. But just a correction there. I don't want to claim something I don't have. But I am really honored to have been invited here. I split my career between the newsroom for almost 20 years and between the classroom. I'm officially retired from the BYU just down the road here after 23 years. And then my friends at BYU Hawaii came and said, you really want to be retired? How about one more year? And I said, this is my joke. I say, if it had been BYU Idaho, I would have probably said no. But if it's BYU Hawaii, sure, I'm in. My wife is, so we are celebrating our teach and beach year. She gets to beach and I get to teach. She's retired after a career in school psychology. But this is kind of a wonderful opportunity to reflect on my career and things that I teach about media, about the First Amendment and religion, which are all kind of my three first loves, if you will. And I have taught a lot about ethics before, so this is what I wanted to do here is my methodology is to take things that I have valued over my career and also in my teaching and thought about the idea of creating a code of ethics, or at least bring all those together in some sort of form where we could have could use it as guidelines for discourse and for journalistic behavior and reporting, and just talk about those. So, and also, uh, I am going to just, if you indulge me, I have a lot of pictures of my career with students at in my media and religion class, as well as my personal journey exploring religions around the world. So my wife said this is a good idea because it makes the boring stuff look interesting. No, no. So first of all, we want to talk about the First Amendment and what is the journalist role in the First Amendment. And uh, so, first of all, I think it's important for religious people and religious institutions, people of faith, to understand that from a point of view of a journalist, it's not their job to defend or promote a point of view. That as journalists in a society, we're looking to be balanced. Secular journalists should be fair, but will not engage in confessional or what we call devotional journalism that might be expected by some religious organizations. I think in over our conversation last night at dinner with some of the guests here today, we talked about the sometimes religious institutions expect journalists to be totally promotional or tell only the good stories. Well, that's not the job of a journalist in any society. Journalists will pursue critics and critical points of view, and no matter what you do, public relations may not change that. So I think part of the job of journalists today and is to make sure that the public understands what journalism's role is when it's reporting about religion and in dialogue. The best, and we're talking from an institutional point of view, the best a religious organization can hope for is that journalists provide balance and fairness in the reporting. That's the best we can hope for. We can't hope that they'll only go talk to only positive, promotional kind of things. Here is the gap that we have found, particularly when I did the whole study, and I'm going to give credit to Dr. Sherry Baker, who was also with me on working on the Mitt Romney campaign. We looked at so many, I can't remember how many thousands and thousands of things we looked at, but unfortunately, during the Mitt Romney campaign, a lot of untrained journalists or people who had no relation to religion, they were political reporters or just beat reporters, didn't understand faith. And when they went to report on Romney's religion, they didn't seek out experts. They just kind of anyway. So there was a lot of issues that we were able to discover in our content analysis and analysis of that. So this is my next point: is that untrained journalists, and we ought to say the untrained public, communicating in what probably is more important than or more prevalent is social media space. Um, it's going to take some effort and maybe some desire to have people come up to the level of understanding. This is just a headline from a few years ago, where it said, "Media coverage of religion is broken. This global survey confirms it." Here is just some brief points. I'm happy to direct you toward the Global Faith and Media Study done by Harris, and this is just some highlights. There is a growing gap between the coverage of religion and the needs of the faithful. This is a global desire for better, there is a global desire for better coverage, understanding, and representation of faith and media. So there, uh, whether or not publishers understand it or editors understand it, people want to have more coverage of religion. 53% of respondents say the media actively ignores religion as an aspect of society and culture. 59% of respondents believe that it's important that the news media cover a diverse set of faith and religious perspectives. 63% of people globally say the high quality content on faith and religion is needed in their respective countries. So I'm going to make the based on this study, I'm going to say there is a desire for religion news and better representation in that news. Um, and one of the takeaways from the report was by Richard Porritt, a former editor at the London Evening Standard and British Press Association. He said, "Many news desks shun real religious news because they believe the subject matter is too tricky to get across properly, and the fear of getting anything wrong is too great. But ignoring these stories or not reporting them fully is anti journalism," he says. So we had an opportunity to have a Latter-day Saints and Media Studies conference just a week or so ago in Hawaii, and we had someone from the Pew Research Center as well as from Aspen Institute on religion, and they're working on this issue. And I love what she said. Abby Gibson is her name, and she said, "Religion's always in the room, and we just need to recognize that religion is always in the room." And they do a lot of work now with elite reporters. I'd like to see it, broad and obviously. This is one of my favorite things. We were staying at 92Y, which is the Jewish YMCA up on the Upper East Side, and I was walking down the street one day, and I love this thing. So I have to put it in here. It's kind of like Lucy on the Peanuts, but here's the pastor says he's going to give you 5 cents. He wasn't there. I might have stopped and asked for some help, but anyway. So what kind of help do we need? So this is kind of my analysis. This is not too sophisticated, and somebody saying, "Oh, you used AI." Well, I try to use the AI in a very ethical way. I put all my, some people call it I put all the information, a lot of this information into an AI, and I said, can you find emergent themes that deal with religion in all of these codes of ethics and these kinds of things? And then it pulled out several themes, which you'll see some, and then I edited and made them my own. But it was a way to look at a lot of stuff. And I want to just tell you some of my favorites that I found that kind of set the tone for this. Um, so SPJ Code of Ethics is the gold standard, international federation. I am going to talk a little bit about the seven deadly sins of religion reporting, and Diane Moore's religious literacy education. And so, first of all, this is the SBJ Code of Ethics. I have to say, teaching media and religion in Hawaii is a blast. This is Byodo-in Temple. It's a reconstruction of a Kyoto temple not far from our campus, and we went on a tour of this. It's not an active temple, so I got to fill in all the details about Pure Land Buddhism, but it's still cool. Seek truth and report it. Minimize harm. Act independently. Be accountable. Transparent. You're going to see how I change that then for religious dialogue ethics code. First of all, let me just refer to Terry Mattingly's. I use this in class. His seven deadly sins of religion reporting, and they're written in kind of a fun way. Use simplistic labels as often as possible. Call them a moderate or a fundamentalist. Deadly sin two, assume that religion equals politics. And this is so prevalent in our society. Conservative Christian equals Republican, right? So why don't we just we conflate them? Treat religious doctrines as traditions, as mere, or not traditions, but just traditions and mere opinions. Be lazy. Always settle for a quote or two from someone with an authoritative title or the same activist you've interviewed time and time again. Sometimes religion reporters may get a little lazy and rely on their same expert. Deadly sin five, focus on the lurid side of religious life. Deadly sin number six, always focus on the big things and ignore the small. Always cover the national and ignore the local. Just like religion is in the room, almost every religion story, you can localize it. We can make it local to our community. Deadly sin number seven, ignore the role that religion plays in other important aspects of modern life. That is, everything we're talking about. I've seen some really interesting coverage about what's going on in the Middle East, and I have a unit. I'm sure we're going to develop another unit after the recent bombings, but Hamas and the unit about the Middle East and what's going on and labels and things we did during the Hamas bombings and so forth with Israel. Barry gets politics and as we know, politics gets tied up, and we have unfortunate events like the shooting at a synagogue recently because of this confusion about what's happening with Israel and the Jewish community. Um, and one of my favorites is also this. And I think I see one of my former students here, which is wonderful to have her. She's going to remember this because this is my guiding light of my classes. Christopher Stendhal's Three Rules of Religious Understanding. He was a Lutheran cleric in Sweden, but also worked at the Harvard Divinity School. And I love this. And I think even journalists can use this, but definitely with our ideas of communication. When trying to understand another religion, you should ask the adherents of that religion and not its enemies. during the Mitt Romney campaign. It was always interesting to me that the first place they went to get a quote was from Huckabee, who was a Baptist preacher. It never quite made sense, but it was always Huckabee who would say things like, you know, that Jesus is, you know, a brother of Christ, you know, things like that. So don't compare your best to their worst. And I think even for journalists, there's that temptation to show something really good about one faith and show something negative about another and do the comparison. And then my favorite is leave room for holy envy. This is where my journalistic purist brethren and sisters may say, well, that's not our job to have holy envy, but maybe there's at least a modicum of respect or curiosity there. I love what Diane Moore has taught and her religious literacy project at Harvard. Um, she argues that responsible public discussion of religion requires recognition that religions are, I love these principles, internally diverse, historically dynamic, and embedded in broader cultural and political contexts. Sometimes journalists and the public miss that. These principles provide an essential intellectual foundation for responsible religion reporting, and I'll continue communication. I have to put a Pope's quote in here just for the fun of it. Um, I love it when a religious leader gets up and talks about. It makes warms my heart when it talks about journalists. And so I want to read this quote from Pope Francis. Journalism is not so much a matter of choosing a profession, but rather embarking on a mission. And I think a lot of people like me who did journalism, we thought it was a mission. It was something for us to do, not just a job. It's a bit like a doctor who studies and works to cure evil in the world. Your mission is to explain the work, to make it less obscure, to make those who live in it less afraid, and to look at others with greater awareness. And he said the three principles are listen, investigate, and report. And often listening is missing from some journalism that I've seen. Another great source developed right up the road here at University of Utah, the Dignity Index. um, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this, but there's a lot of work being done and political communication with this. And in fact, they used Utah political advertisements a couple of years ago in the test run of the Dignity Index, looking at the content of ads. And they brought a diverse group of students, many different backgrounds, ethnicities, et cetera, together in a group that had looked at these ads. And it was really quite amazing the kind of things they saw. Just in brief, um, you look at level one. You have, and I think today you're going to have some opportunity to talk about, you know, how to communicate with less violence and everything. Level one is that it's a violent words to violent actions, really the worst of the dignity index. Level two does not call for violent action, but accuses the other of promoting evil. How long do we still hear that? But obviously, the highest level is level 8 believes everyone has inherent worth and therefore treats everyone with dignity no matter what. That's the basic human recognition that we're all human and there's a dignity to be had in that communication. So I've been using this in my classes. We look at, I've had them look at political ads and other things and use this, and it's fascinating. The students start to recognize, well, maybe I should change my social media because I kind of go number two a lot, you know? So um, so here's my draft ethics code. I want to make sure I stay on track. So you'll see I've acted a couple of things, maybe at least one, and that is, and obviously the content is different than the SPJ code. I've kept the same things because I joined SPJ as a college student, so I kind of like the code. But here's the things that I'm looking at. So let me just go over there. I'm not going to read all of this, I promise. But if the QR code, I'll put it back on the QR code at the beginning if you all want to look at it. But accuracy and verification. Um, so I think what's important here is standard journalism says verify information using multiple credible sources. The one that I've added from my AI work provide historical, theological, and cultural context, distinguish between official teachings and individual interpretations, consult scholars and practitioners when covering unfamiliar traditions. So those would be new things that I've added to a standard code of ethics. Religious literacy. I love this picture, by the way. We are at Langar at the Khalsa Jatha Gurdwara in London, as an amazing place, having our meal of Indian food. Journalists and the public should cultivate religious literacy as a public and professional competency. This may be a big order to first of all even have journalists do this, but to ask the public to do this as well. But there's certainly lots of things out there. Avoid simplistic labels. I'll even put out the term orthodox, fundamentalist, moderate, or extremist or cult, often overused or simplistic. Um, I've taught the Bloomberg way or the Bloomberg style of writing, and in the I really as an international audience, Bloomberg has some really great points about labels, which I don't think a lot of American journalistic outlets have, but it really says don't show don't tell show I mean tell show me what you mean when you say orthodox or fundamentalist or moderate. Explain, give me a definition, do those kinds of things rather than just the simple label. I had to put this in here. BYU, my alma mater, played Notre Dame in Las Vegas a few years ago, and I was just impressed because this was considered a Notre Dame home game, and they play the national anthem, and then they have the cross with the marching band, and I said, this is really. This is the merge of religion and sports, and here's some trends. We talked about some of these last night. I don't want to steal any thunder from anybody. I'll just hit a couple of them. The religion is now much more of an individual search journey for faith, uh, moving away from organized and institutional religion. Some people, it's DIY faith or religion. You're doing it yourself now, and you get help from maybe those kind of things. Anna's here, and she's gonna hate this word again. Oh no, he's saying that word again. Numinous is the replacement of traditional religion. Pop culture is religion. So I was mentioning last night, one of my mentors, Dan Stout, did a lot of work with interpretive communities. And so we talk about how the Flying Elvi or the Grateful Dead or whatever sometimes has become a interpretive community, a community of numinous or belief that goes beyond religion, and certainly sports. I mean, college football, for example, is has the elements of a religion to it. Give me that online religion. We have a lot of police people who go now online individually to receive their religion and denominational affiliation. I was looking at a study the other day that of the percentage of megachurches. Um, most of them do not align or have a denominational connection anymore. And the rise of the nuns, the NONESs, although there's some dispute recently about maybe the nuns are starting to come back. And that wonderful term, SBNR, spiritual but not religious. So I'll just throw those out there. This is not part of my ethics code, but things that I think that the public and journalists ought to be aware of as they're reporting on the trends in society. And I'm sure that our other panels will have others. Um, uh, so take religious belief seriously. Journalists and the public should treat religious doctrines as coherent systems of belief rather than merely personal opinions. Beliefs that appear unfamiliar should not be portrayed as extreme without a careful effort to understand their theological and historical context. One example comes to mind from the Mitt Romney campaign. Newsweek magazine sent a reporter to follow Mitt Romney around, and they asked him this question. So, to many people who aren't familiar with the Latter-day Saint tradition, we have proxy baptism for the dead. And this reporter was so amazed that sounded that's so weird, and so the way that it was framed in the Newsweek article was, Mitt, have you done baptism for the dead? He said yes. Oh, and anyway, the way it was framed, does it make it sound like it's the weirdest things ever? For those of us who are of Latter-day Saint tradition, it's part of our faith, and it's a serious thing. But if you look back at that cover, it was a Book of Mormon musical figure with Mitt Romney's head pasted on it on the cover of Time magazine. So, Newsweek, excuse me. Minimize harm. And by the way, those of you who are from here locally, you'll be surprised at the religious diversity, although be it small. If you're looking for some way to understand, here's one excellent example. In South Jordan is a wonderful Hindu temple. My students have loved to go there. So respecting sacred beliefs and practices, understanding them. Religion reporting and public communication requires sensitivity towards sacred rituals, worship practices, and spiritual experiences. Communicators treat those of faith and no faith with dignity and respect. We kind of talked about that already. Communicators should consider the impact on audience and society and respect the dignity and autonomy of audiences and subjects. So one of the things we do in my ethics class is talk about what's the impact on the society or the person. This is not a religious example, but it really is interesting. So the woman who was caught on camera at the Coldplay concert with someone who was not her husband, it went viral and everything like that. The New York Times did a very thoughtful piece. They went and found her in upstate New York, and they did this big piece about how this has like ruined her life. So I want people to say, this invasion of privacy, while it may be funny and it's made fun of in an Allstate commercial now, um, what does it mean to the human person when you write a story like this? Um, by the way, I love this picture of St. Martin's in the field. They had a competition for the window. We're going to do some stained glass, and then they got this artist to do this, like a hole to heaven, is kind of what it's called. So when we're doing religious comparisons, we all have bias. We all come from a tradition, and we may want to compare to others, but we should try to put away that bias as much as we can and avoid comparing the best to the worst, as I mentioned before. But we should also, if there are comparisons, try to involve intellectual honesty and interreligious understanding if we can. Avoid sensationalism. We love the journalists, I'll say that we journalists love to write about televangelists who've gone wrong or whatever. There is a lot of scandal that can be had in any faith. Certainly those are news stories, but to dwell on those only and not talk about the things that are happening in communities that build faith, that may be good, is, you know, is something we should really think about. Digital media incentivizes or often reward outrage-driven coverage. So not only do we have the journalism going on, now we have the social media dimension, the online dimension, which seems to, you know, put this whole thing into a different demeanor, and then usually get black and white. This is evil. This is good. This is Republican. This is Democrat. We have this, and I know we have other talks about polarization today, but certainly this kind of communication drives it. And I guess I hope from this conference that we have some ideas of how do we counter that. I mean, and I just don't know. I mean, proposing a code of ethics is all good and very, very ivory tower. But is there something we can do on the level of folks out here, like students, that can you change how you approach things and change how we have dialogue? And I think the root of that is recognizing human dignity. Religion journalists and communicators should treat individuals and communities with dignity, particularly when reporting on tragedy, conflict, or deeply personal faith experiences. I was impressed. Many of you know that a Latter-day Saint chapel was bombed, and a person with anti-Mormon beliefs drove into a church in Michigan. I happened to have a student all the way in Hawaii who was from that area, and we were going to do some assignment on it, and she said, "Can I be excused?" And I said, "Absolutely," because she was taking this very, very, very hard. Had relatives and others who had been there in that chapel when this, person drove the truck in there. But I was pretty impressed. I watched the media coverage both by national media and local media in Michigan, and there seemed to be a lot of respect. And I know after these synagogue shootings we've had recently, there seems to be a lot of respect. But how do we engender that in all of the comments? Unfortunately, in the Latter-day Saint bombing, President Trump said something about Latter-day Saints being Christian, and then all of those who don't think that Latter-day Saints are Christian went online and said they're not Christian, they're not Christian, and it kind of was a little bit disconcerting. There might have been a different time and place to debate doctrine. It was seemed rather sharp and edgy for that kind of thing to take over the content of social media at a time when our community was mourning. Maintain editorial independence. This is something that I think a lot of, some religious leaders and others probably need some help with this, and that is we do have to remain free from obligations to religious institutions, and we do have to be distinguish between devotional content and understand the difference between independent reporting and devotional content, and help the public to understand the difference. I can't tell you how many of my co-congregants in Latter-day Saints come to me and say, "Well, how come they?" And why didn't they write the good news? And I'm going, "Well, they're trying to do their job." And if I was a journalist, and I still remember the one time, and I know that Peggy Fletcher Stack from the Salt Lake Tribune, shout out to her, and what she does is often challenged. Well, what do you believe? What's your faith? Who are you? And I think that sometimes she said it's none of your business, which I think is a good response. But I had the opportunity to represent the church-owned Deseret News in the Community of Christ back in the reorganized Church of Jesus Christ. I went and did a three-part series about the first non-Smith prophet president of their church. So I spent like 3 days in Independence, Missouri, talking to people, did a three-part series. And that was one of the very first things I got was I'm obviously a Latter-day Saint from Utah, from the church's own newspaper. Okay, so my biases are on my sleeve. Um, but I'm saying I'm going to really try to be fair here. And I learned a lot of things. First of all, I was really ignorant about what a creedal religion is. And it's like a very basic thing you learn in Religion 101, but I had no clue what that meant. And, Latter-day Saints are more creedal than the uh, reorganized church or the community of Christ. And so when they started talking about things, I'm going, well, you don't believe, anyway, it was a very, very good education for me. But during that process, I had people come up to me and say, you know, I had a member of their quorum of 70 or 70 who said, well, Latter-day Saints do this, blah, 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 blah. And I said, I'm really not here to debate religion. That might be for another time, but I'm really here just to cover your story. Tell me your story. Please tell me your story. And sometimes religion journalists do have that comes up. So we need to distinguish reporting from advocacy, just a principle that journalists seem to forget a lot these days. It's hard. I do appreciate the Wall Street Journal having a campaign to say everything's clearly labeled online and elsewhere. It used to be we had the front page and then we had the editorial page and we kind of knew what was what. Now it's hard to know what is advocacy versus what is not. And this is where we get to resist political reductionism, um, assuming that religious behavior is primary political, that somehow there's this political agenda. And we have problems with Christian nationalism right now and things of that nature. So, religious motivation often arises from theological, moral, and communal commitments rather than partisan ideology. To me, it's always interesting to find what the assumptions are, for example, on immigration. Latter-day Saints and evangelicals often diverge on immigration because of our history. We were banned immigrants from the United States, came to what was then Mexico, at least the body of that point. And so there is some, and many Latter-day Saints have served missions like me in other countries. And so the idea of immigration and what's happening with ICE and other things right now sometimes takes a different path depending on the faith. So transparency and sources methods, we should include a diversity of sources. I think we should always look at all sides of the story. One of the in the Elements of Journalism textbook that some of us use in class, there it talks about that we should, in a checklist of journalism, it talks about that nobody should like the story too much, that there shouldn't be one side of the story that it likes the story too much, that everybody sees themselves in the story, whether fairly represented or not. Um, and then this is one of my favorite pictures. Rabbi CJ, just I have to quick divergent. Rabbi CJ is a brand new rabbi in Honolulu. He is of evangelical background from Oklahoma. He went to Oklahoma State University, fell in love with Judaism, and 10 years later, after he got his PhD and a rabbinical degree, he is now the rabbi at the largest mosque in Honolulu, and my students just love him, and he's so Hawaiian. Even though he's got the Hawaiian shirt, the Hawaiian yarmulke, and he had the flip flops on, and he's so laid back. So anyway, but here he's teaching my students about the Torah. It was a wonderful experience. Communicators should seek to understand religions through the voices of their adherents. Rather, we've got that. Um, and then here's the controversial one for journalists, but I kind of want to, and maybe I'm being an advocate, but leave room for holy envy, or for journalists, maybe at least the humility to cover both positive and negative news, that there are things that are admirable about all faiths. Stendhal's concept of holy envy encourages humility and openness toward recognizing admirable elements within other religious traditions. For journalists, this principle promotes curiosity and respect when reporting on unfamiliar beliefs, really trying to get to the story and really understanding that. And there are resources out there. There's a lot of resources. Peggy Stack works with the International Association for Religion Journalists. I was honored to be able to attend her conference. You saw a picture from Cordoba, Spain. I went to their conference there. They do a lot of great work. I met a lot of really great international religion journalists. There's all these other kinds of things. At BYU, there's often religion and media tracks at the Religion Freedom Media Annual Forum. We had back in 2023, we invited Latin American journalists and religion leaders from Latin America, and we had a really great conversation about covering religion in Latin America. We had Catholic, Latter-day Saints, Assemblies of God, all sorts of different major faiths talking about how the media do their job in Latin America. Unfortunately, I don't speak Spanish, so I had to use it. Didn't I didn't understand all of it, but this is amazing. And then there's the religion and media interest group and I should put up here, I forgot to put up here, David is the editor of the Journal of Media and Religion, a great academic publication for issues like this and many others too. But here's some, I do have a link to it. So Journal of Media and Religion, there's the Coalition for Faith and Media. There's a really great group that we met with while we were in London called the Religion Media Center. They do a lot of great work in the UK. The Pluralism Project. I'm going to tout my own little conference we did a couple weeks ago. But anyway, these are great, and I will put it back up there. So there's lots of resources. So why this code of ethics? Oh, I have to mention this. My friend Joe Grimm, this is a shout out to him. He's a former journalist at the Detroit News, and he runs, and this is a great idea for any of those who are academics in the group. He spends every semester, and this class project is to create a bias buster, and then they publish it on Amazon. There's one for almost every major religion, and basically they ask 100 questions. He asked me to review the one about Latter-day Saints. Jana Reese and I reviewed the one about Latter-day Saints. But they're just great. And what's nice is they were created by college students under the director of a really good journalist and understanding. And it was a great class project because they learned so much. So there's wonderful things here. Um, and then what might come ahead. So my idea is that maybe this code could be implemented into a largest repository. I love the word corpus. They use that over at the BYU Law School. But to get a corpus of ethics codes from around the world or whatever, and maybe grow them into something that could be used for religion specifically. Um, so they could be a place where people could go and answer questions. We could find case studies. The SPJ code, by the way, is up for its 100th anniversary, and they're looking for additions. I think I might ask them to add at least a line about religion and respect for ethnic and religious groups or whatever. But this could be a possibility. But in conclusion, I was another picture. I was in Yangon, Myanmar, and the Hindus were repainting their temple. I love this. This is the most rickety scaffolding I've ever seen in my life, and they're painting the temple with all these multiple colors. It was an amazing thing, but I'm not going to read all of this. I'm just going to say, in an era of increasing diversity, but at the same time, pluralization, that having some sort of guidelines developed maybe to help an online person who's serious about doing the right thing. Obviously, there's people who are not, and religions. And I know that there is fewer and fewer religion journalists with the shrinking newsrooms that are here around. But is there still ability for even a regular beat reporter to get a little bit of some training or nowhere to go to look up about Roman Catholic ideals and understand them before they go to the church and talk to the priest, um, and uh, and also learning to make connections with adherents. Certainly, the institutional church is there, but I prefer having my students go talk to adherents and have them tell their real lived experience. Anyway, these are some ideas, and I'm hoping that it will be a a ground level idea of creating some dialogue about principles to communicate by. First of all, obviously, as a journalist, I'm kind of pointing at journalists, but at the same time, could this grow into something a little bit bigger? So I want to thank you for my time and for the opportunity to speak here. It's been a great privilege to come back home for just a bit, but I wanted to show off also my wonderful, I have to give credit to my wonderful students who come from areas of the Pacific and Indonesia and the Philippines. And I have never had, and I'm sorry, but I've never had such amazing media and religion classes because they bring such diversity to talk about their lived experiences among Islam and India or Hinduism or whatever. And so it's been a really great experience to be there. But it made me think even more about how we can develop this kind of respect and for religion and media, but still keep our values, First Amendment values, as journalists in that kind of society. Thank you for your time.
So we have about 10 minutes for Q&A. Colby has the microphone. Since we are streaming and recording, if you have a question, please wait for the microphone.
And by the way, I put back up the QR code and the link if anybody wants to get access to these slides. And I have a longer paper too, but it's not quite ready. Is there someone?
I'll take the first question.
Yes, please.
So my question involves the issue of self-identification
Okay.
and how religious groups A are designated and how that factors into who controls the narrative in representing a particular religious group. Okay.
That's a great question. And I at this university a few years ago, I wrote a paper before there was a call among my uh, uh, religious group to use the term the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints rather than Mormons. But that be said, there still is a wide debate about that self-identification. So I could self-identify as Mormon or a Latter-day Saint, and others, in the church institutionally wants me and my fellow congregants to use the official name of the church. So that's a tough question, but I think the thing I came up with was based upon ethics codes about race and ethnicity in the AP Style book and other places, was that this AP Style book says defer to what people want to be called, whether Black or African American. And applying that same logic to religion, then could I say, I want to be called Roman Catholic? Do I want to be called Catholic? Do I want to be called whatever is it? So I think I allow that. I think also in an article, though it's probably fair to say, while this person prefers to be called Mormon, that the institution prefers the longer name. As a journalist, I probably should put that in there.
Yeah.
But
That leads to a second
okay.
question about uh, who speaks for the faith, right, in any particular group, right? I know journalists often want to seek out both official voices, but
Right. And I'm encouraging that,
ordinary practitioners
right.
and some religious communities would much prefer that their voices, right, the institutional authoritative voice, uh, dominate, right? I had a colleague who does work in Mormon studies where he had the principle that he would not cite an official source about any other system of belief, whether it's Catholicism or evangelicalism, unless that voice was an official spokesperson for that tradition.
Well, that's
Right. So there's
yeah.
so there's a question of like lived experience versus right institutional.
That's a great question, I think, and as we found from secret wives of Mormon wives, who have tended to not speak exactly what my doctrine of my faith is at times, and there's been a lot of discussion online about how they got it wrong. But I think that a journalist, I absolutely, as a journalist, I teach students that they need to go get the voices of the lived experience. That's so important to a story. You need to have that. But at the same time, maybe you do have a clarification that while this lived experience says this, and for this person, that lived experience, that spiritual journey for them looks like this is kind of how, and you might, at another point in the story or another coverage, you say, but this is kind of what the church or the institution says. And certainly, I mean, we talk about Roman Catholicism and the issue of abortion, and not everybody agrees with the church's line on abortion. And so you might talk about that. They're talking about the lived experience of someone and who may be pro-abortion, while the faith generally is anti-abortion or whatever. So I think that's part of the nuances that good journalists and probably even good, and I would say even good communicators about religion need to figure out. Don't go just to the stereotype, or don't go to just to the institutional. As Diane Moore says, that it diverges and it changes over time, and that we need history and other kinds of contexts will change that relived experience for other people. And so I even know in my faith that many people are on many faith journeys inside of that umbrella. And I think we can't say, well, everybody's like this. We have to, you know, report more on that. To me, it's important to talk about the lived experience.
Yeah, good. Thank you.
How does media affect how people see religion? And secondly, how does politics and religion connect and create the sort of discourse we get today?
Well, I think it's the shortest distance I can take to get the answer is about Muslims in America. That the media coverage and the popular culture coverage of Muslims in America is very much goes to the stereotype of we talk about Sharia law. There's people who every legislative session here in our state and other states, oh, we got to have this ban on Sharia law. I'm going, well, you really understand what Sharia law is, and you can't just overturn our Constitution and make it Sharia law. I mean, there's a process, and Latter-day Saints in our legislature are going to reflect their values in bills and laws. So the discourse for Muslims is about terrorism, is about all these kind of things, and there once in a while is some popular culture as well as news that punches through that. We have a great, we have a mosque, we have a couple mosques here in Salt Lake where we've gone. Our district attorney here in Salt Lake, up in Salt Lake County, did a talk about hate crimes, and what talked at the mosque there, and I had my students attend with that. It was a really great discussion about how people, have these stereotypes about Muslims or whatever faith, and unfortunately, my faith, Latter-day Saints, have some of that going on. And unfortunately, it's not, I'm not going to blame the media. I think for the large part, media does a pretty good job. But when I'm talking media broadly, popular culture, social media, those things get amplified to the point of creating that, stereotypes, tropes, those kinds of things that make people, and you really do need to go. And I have a sister-in-law. I love these. I have an uncle. I have a sister-in-law. It's my sister-in-law story. Went to Boise, Idaho, and she's got Republican conservative radio playing on the porch 24/7. I don't know what's going on there. And now we started talking about my Muslim brothers and sisters, and she's, oh, and I said, we just went down to I said, my wife and I just went down to the farmer's market, and there's some great Sudanese people living in Boise who are Muslim. And I had this wonderful chat with them. It was so wonderful to see their lived experience and how they're dealing with coming to a country. And, she's ready to lock them up and send them out. I'm going, you need to go, you need to go visit them. You need to go to the farmer's market. You need to go to a mosque and have that conversation, because that's not who these people are. I didn't see any signs that they're just trying to eke out a living and raise their family just like the rest of us. That's a great question.
Thank you, Professor Campbell, for the work you're doing. It's very heartening. My question's about how we're living in a moment of so-called fake news, where
Yeah.
everybody can accuse everyone else of not knowing what the facts are. And I'm wondering if there's a way for this code of ethics that you're interested in developing to address that crisis of trust and that problem of getting at truth.
That's one of the troubling things about being in the profession. As a journalist, I look at how people, the discourse today, and look at how news is portrayed, and my students, what their news they're getting, what their sources are. Most of them don't subscribe to any sort of legitimate news source that comes on Facebook, or mostly Instagram is where they get most of their news. So how do we, yeah, there are some really great groups out there. There's Trusty News, there's a news literacy group, there's others that are working at the edges of this, but you're not seeing a lot of that in the mainstream, and it is difficult, and we have a continuing polarization among news organizations, moving toward kind of off the center to different points of view. So I've just described a problem, done this better, but yes, it's the problem of our time for communication. There's so much misinformation and disinformation that we're struggling to always know what the truth is. It's a constant battle.
Thank you, Joel. Before we thank him publicly, I just want to alert students who are here for credit. There are QR codes on the sides of the room. If you're here for a class, go ahead and log into that QR code and identify yourself. Thank you, Joel. Please
Thank
join
you.
me in thanking Joel. All right, 10-minute break.